warm welcome to everyone who joined. So let's get started. Okay, now let's start with the basics. So what's a persistent identifier, or PID, as they sometimes called? Think of it as a unique and long-lasting label, usually a code or a number that is assigned to something digital. That could be an object, a person, an organization, and so on. The whole point of it is that no matter what changes, like where something is stored or how it's described, you'll always be able to find, cite, and link to it. Some PIDs also come with extra information called metadata that describes what they're attached to. And when you click on a PID, it will take you to a central landing page where you can get more details. PIDs are actually really important in academia. They make sure that research outputs, researchers, and institutions stay findable and identifiable, even as the things are changing fast. In the past, I would say the big challenge was finding information, accessing information at all. But now these days, the problem is more like sorting through endless amounts of data, of information, and to pick out what's actually reliable. So we have a quick look at the three most common identifiers that we use here at the University of Bern. Okay, so we all know how tricky it can be to find a specific researcher and their work. Academic careers are full of changes. People switch universities, they join new research groups, they even move into different fields of research. Of course, sometimes they change names, they get married, and so on. So the idea behind a persistent identifier for researchers is simple. Wherever you go and however your career evolves, you can always be identified and your work can be credited to you. And this is where the ORCiD comes in. So the ORCiD, the Open Researcher and Contributor ID, gives you a unique lifelong ID that sets you apart from other researchers, even if it happens that you have the same name. And it stays with you throughout your career. It's basically a 16-digit number and a link to your personal profile. With ORCiD, you can connect all your research activities and outputs, like publications and data sets or peer reviews that you do, in one place. That means you have a complete and easily accessible record of everything you've contributed. ORCiD is actually nothing new. It's been around since about 15 years now, and it's a non-profit open source platform that is not owned by any company or any, let's say, shady organization. So it's open and open source. Another benefit is that it works with a lot of research systems. It's well integrated in many systems. Think about submitting a manuscript or apply for a grant. This is where you can use your ORCiD. It means that the information can be transferred automatically, so you don't have to keep entering the same details on every platform. It's also worth mentioning that more and more funders are now requiring an ORCiD, like the SNSF, for submissions, and also publishers are pushing on this identifier because they all have the same problems with identifying people and attributing the work to them. So I would say it's becoming kind of a standard practice to have one. Very important here to know that with ORCiD, you have full control over what's visible on the profile and who can see it. And ORCiD has an opt-in system. That means that you choose the sources of the information that is shown. Now, what about identifying the organizations researchers work at or collaborate with? That is where ROR, the Research Organization Registry, as its full name sounds, comes in. ROR gives each research organization a unique and persistent ID, so-called ROR ID, that the institutions can be clearly identified even if their names changes or even if they are written in different languages. You can imagine it's kind of the same problem as with the single researchers we see on an institutional level. So using ROR IDs helps standardize affiliations in publications, data sets, and grant applications. It is, very simply speaking, reducing the mistakes that can happen when people, for example, enter the names of their organization in a free text field where we see many different ways of naming the university by shortcuts, UniB or University of Bern, and then we have 4 languages, and all that can be quite confusing. So that is why the ROR was developed. It was developed by the research community itself, and all its data is openly available and open for anyone to reuse. The ROR ID is also closely working with other systems. I don't know if you know GRID, or you probably know Wikidata, also ISNI or Crossref Funder ID. So this makes it even easier to connect institutional data across different platforms. And it improves the research information infrastructure as a whole. So at this point, we just encourage you to use the Unibase ROR ID whenever possible, and maybe to also motivate your research partners to get one if they don't already have one, because it's important for giving proper credit to the organizations you and the others work with. Right, so we've heard about people, we've heard about organizations, and now let's go on the smallest level and talk about research output itself. As an example, you can think about all the different versions that a single research article exists in. So there might be preprints, accepted manuscripts, the final publisher version, they are all flying around. And the question is, how do you keep track of which version, for example, you're citing? Or how do you make sure all the versions are properly attributed to the right researchers? What happens if a publisher's website changes or if if there are major changes? So that's where we would recommend using a DOI or a DOI, a digital object identifier. They are globally recognized and readable for both humans and machines. They are unique to each item, as a persistent identifier should be, and there is no confusion between similar titles or duplicate works. They are also linking to landing pages, and very importantly, they are indexed by search engines and by scholarly databases, so it makes the findability easier. And most of the repositories are assigning DOIs already, like BORIS or also Zenodo or Figshare. So it is established as good practice to assign a DOI. So in short, DOIs are essential for making sure that digital scholarly content can be found, cited, and accessed in a long term. So they have become a key part of the infrastructure, and they should help us keep academic communication running smoothly. Yes, so now I hand over to Sumi, and she will explain some more.
Yes, thank you very much. So as you have heard already from Julia, repositories usually already assign DOIs or work with ORCiD and so on, and other persistent identifiers. So What's nice in our case, Boris Portal or Institutional Repository and the current research information system is also doing quite a lot of work for you, even if you don't always notice it. When you upload a publication or research data in Boris Portal, your ORCiD is already linked to it if you are working at the University of Bern and if the personal system of the University of Bern has your ORCiD. Then each publication and research data will get assigned a DOI when you upload something. So if there is a bitstream, usually you do get a DOI where you can cite the whole item with the bitstream attached to it. So it makes it easy to cite and it makes it permanently findable. And then it uses also the correct ROR ID for your institutional affiliation, even if someone else writes it differently. As mentioned before, it can be the shortcut UniBen or the UniBen or University of Bern. It will be uniquely identified as University of Bern with an ID. And this also applies for external organizations. So let's say if you would like to credit the ETH Zurich, so you can find it in the authority list from the ROR registry. All of this means your work isn't just sitting in a database, so it's properly connected to a much larger research infrastructure. And as more systems adopt these identifiers, this networks becomes even more powerful. So even if you don't really interact with it directly, metadata will be stored in the repository and it helps you and it helps the research be more visible, connected, and reusable. Now, looking ahead, the goal is to enable more automatic exchange of metadata between the systems. For example, having the data flow in and out, so import and export out of Boris Portal via those PIDs without much manual effort. At the moment, there is a lot of submission forms and a lot of metadata that you have to manually type in, and we are working on improving these import and export mechanisms. The main challenge at the moment, the reason why it is that way, is how our repository is set up. It's quite customized for the university management needs, especially when it comes to how we have the separate and different collection types like publications and research data and funding information and so on. And getting the mapping right of the metadata for each of these categories, it's a lot of work and there are a lot of standards and that you have to keep in mind so that it is machine readable across all other systems that are available. So it's already a lot happening behind the scenes, but there is more to come and we are working on it. And on that note, I would also like to show you some more PIDs that are currently being developed. First, there is this one called Confident. It's made for conferences and scientific events, helping to give unique IDs to things like presentations, posters, or even contributions from participants. This should make it easier to properly cite and track the impact of those events also over time. Um, I know some of you might know it is also possible to assign a DOI to a presentation or a poster, but I think the idea of confident is really to be specific about that this presentation belongs to this conference, so they would like to track it accordingly. Then there is, I call it RAID, but maybe it's also called RAID, which stands for Research Activity Identifier. It helps track entire research projects throughout their life cycle. including all output contributors and institutions involved. So it creates a clear, persistent record that improves project management and makes it easier to link everything back to the original research. And finally, we have ORCiD, which focuses on physical research resources like lab instruments or biological samples. This is really important for reproducibility as it ensures everyone knows exactly which materials were used in experiments. All three are still emerging and show a lot of promise, especially if you are involved in collaborative or interdisciplinary research, where tracking different kinds of output and resources matter a lot. And of course, there are many more in the pipeline, but those three we felt like were probably the ones that could get established next. So this is why we show them. So, in summary, persistent identifiers are a way to connect and track research outputs, people, and resources. And they make research more transparent, discoverable, and reusable across disciplines. And if you want to learn more or need help using PIDs, the Open Science team is happy to support you on that. Thank you very much.